Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on Wednesday afternoon. Today is September 18th and we are going to have an NFL packed schedule today where we are going to be reacting to the news that the Miami Dolphins are placing quarterback Tua Tagovailoa on injured reserve list. He, of course, suffered the concussion on Thursday Night Football last week, and it seemed like his football future is up in jeopardy, but he seems determined to come back, so we'll be breaking down that entire situation and what the rest of the season looks like for the Miami Dolphins as they try and get Tua to work back from injury. We are then going to be now that week 2, I should say, is in the books, we are going to be doing our weekly NFL tier list, breaking down each of the teams into 6 tiers and working from there. So we'll get into that. We're then going to be talking about some of the young quarterbacks in the NFL. We're going to start off by talking about Caleb Williams' performance from Sunday that we haven't gotten to talk about just yet as he continues to struggle out of the gates. Is there some sense of concern there? We will be diving into that, and then we will be sort of parlaying that into an overall rankings with those rookie quarterbacks and the quarterbacks from the 2023 class, as well as to these next generation quarterbacks who would I feel most comfortable building around moving forward. And then we are going to be finishing off the show by doing a little bit more of a vague list here where we're going to be talking about the top 5 most impressive quarterbacks in the NFL through the first 2 weeks. A lot of unexpected names up there, so we are going to be diving into all of that. But before we get into that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, whether it be a quick comment or a thoughtful question. Let us know what you think on the latest developments in the sports world, and we try and make this show as interactive as possible and get to as many comments as we can. If you would additionally like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube, or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, to leave a tip or donation along with your comment, and your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. The Miami Dolphins, who saw their quarterback Tua Tagovailoa have one of the scariest moments in recent football history as he went down with his 3rd concussion in just 2 years during their Thursday night football game against the Buffalo Bills. They have officially decided to place Tua on the injured reserve list, meaning that he will be out for at least 4 weeks. I would have to imagine that it's going to be a little bit longer than that. Now, we'll see. Like I mentioned, 3rd concussion in 2 years. It is very serious at this point, but Tua seems determined to return to play for the Dolphins, that he is not ready to give up on his NFL dreams. Thought that there was a chance, considering the fact that he also just got paid this offseason. The number it specifically was reported on earlier this morning about the idea that I believe it is somewhere around $49 million that would be fully guaranteed for Tua if he were to outright retire, or more specifically, be forced into retirement. So doesn't sound like that is going to be the case, and he is going to try and work his way back into the NFL moving forward here. But this is a situation that obviously I have my thoughts, you have your thoughts, but this is his decision. He's deciding to stick with football, so we do ultimately just need to look at it from that perspective. So by being placed on the injured reserve list, he is going to be required to miss at least 4 weeks, and then we'll see from there. CBS Sports put out an article with their injury expert that now at this point the protocol would be about 8 weeks. we'll see about that. I think that Tua is going to play as soon as he physically can. Now, whatever goes on behind the scenes in terms of him being cleared, we will have to see. But if Tua is unable to go, I do believe that this Dolphins season is in serious jeopardy. This is a team that I had on the outside looking in for the playoffs as it was, and now they haven't exactly looked great through 2 weeks. Obviously, Tua suffers the concussion in the third quarter of that Thursday night football game, but they were already down big at that point. So you can chalk that up as a loss, even if you want to give them a little bit of an excuse for Tua's injury, that it wasn't more competitive. They were being beaten pretty handedly at the time of the injury, and now moving forward here, they are going to have Skylar Thompson at the helm for them. Now, I have been a big believer that there are a lot of quarterbacks that can, be an efficient quarterback in that Mike McDaniel offense, especially with all of the weapons surrounding that quarterback position. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You have a couple of speedy running backs. Raheem Mostert still dealing with his injury. He's been unavailable for them through 2 weeks, but him along with Devin Achane, who was a breakout star last season, now hoping to get a full season of experience, considering that he went down with a season-ending injury in his 2023 rookie campaign. That there are a lot of pieces surrounding that quarterback position anyways that, in theory, the Dolphins will be able to get by for at least a short period of time with Tua on the bench. Now, like I mentioned, being placed on the IR, that will keep him out for at least 4 weeks, which I believe would set him up for a return in week 7. The Dolphins schedule in the next few weeks, they are in Seattle this upcoming Sunday. Then they have a little bit of a longer week playing versus Tennessee at home, and then they are at New England in week 5 before the bye week. So that's really the timetable we're looking at as the earliest Tua could return, and it is largely a manageable schedule. Now, especially against Mike Macdonald and what is a tough Seattle defense in a very tough environment to play in Seattle, I have some real doubts about their chances in that game. But from that point on, the Titans, another Monday night game against the Titans, by the way, last year, that was sort of the emergence of Will Levis pulling off the comeback there. So just to add a little bit of fuel to the fire there, feels like Mike McDaniel probably will try and remind his team of that game. And ultimately, I don't think that the Titans are all that dynamic of an offense anyways, that if their defense is able to step it up, this does feel like a game that could sort of be maybe a little bit of a slugfest, but a winnable one for Miami. The Patriots coming into this season known as one of the lesser teams in the NFL. Now, they've shown through their first couple games that they may be a little bit tougher of an out than initially thought. We'll see sort of how that fully comes into play. Offense is a little bit limited in the passing game. Offensive line there still a mess. So another game where the Dolphins, this is really going to be a test, and sort of an important test as well, just in general, if they ever were to be Super Bowl contenders, of can they win in low-scoring games? They showed that maybe a little bit in week 1 against the Jaguars, and what was ultimately a pretty sloppy game, in my opinion, on both sides there. But it's the next 3 weeks before the bye week are very doable for them. Now, Skylar Thompson is not somebody that I have real faith in to totally get the job done. That's why the defense is going to be so important for them. The Dolphins did also, interestingly enough, sign Tyler Snoop Huntley off of the Baltimore Ravens practice squad. Huntley, a lot of you may remember that he actually did end up making a Pro Bowl a couple years ago, even though he played in just 4 games. Kind of the ultimate stance of how the Pro Bowl is kind of so meaningless. No offense to Huntley, but just sort of the reality of the situation there. He's an interesting player. He gives you at least something with his legs, that there is an element that you can work on. And in such a fast-paced offense, you do wonder if maybe he's somebody that could at least show a little bit of life there. But ultimately, I don't see any real chance that the Dolphins are going to be able to sort of dig themselves out of, it's not even a hole that they're in right now. They're still 1-1, so they're very much statistically alive in the mix. I mean, it's kind of hard to be out of it unless you're maybe the Carolina Panthers just 2 weeks into the season. But ultimately speaking here, I think that the Dolphins can't really be taken seriously unless Tua is playing for them, which is, again, something that you can sort of agree or disagree with the idea of him playing. But if we are going to operate under the assumption that Tua is wanting to return to the NFL and that he is eventually going to get cleared, he really is the X factor, and that's sort of a no-duh statement. How often, is the quarterback not really an X factor for them? But Tua, it's interesting with him, and it's tough because, again, you don't want to bash Tua too much for his play on Thursday night last week because of, obviously, the concussion that was suffered. I had seen myself in the 24 hours leading up to that game talking myself into the play of Tua a little bit more, and this idea that, yes, is he a perfect quarterback by any means of the imagination? No, but I also do feel like he operates the system that Miami wants pretty well, all things considered. Just this idea of making those quick decisions, delivering the ball on time, and there's sort of maybe some of the simpler skills, but he has done so very well the past couple of years under McDaniel, and I know that it was not a great Tua performance. Obviously had a couple of interceptions. I thought that I liked the aggression that we still saw from him there. It seemed like he was trying to add this extra element to his game of providing a little bit more of anticipation throws downfield. Now, we talked about this last week when we covered the game. He just tried to throw anticipation routes to Robbie Chosen and Grant Dubose. So those aren't necessarily the exact weapons I would prefer to see that, where he has probably pretty little rhythm and connection with either one of them. But the other part of his game that it seemed like from the first 2 weeks you were maybe seeing a little bit more was just this idea of Tua upping his game a little bit in the pocket in terms of a mobility standpoint. Now, I would probably imagine that takes another step back, considering Tua is just going to try and avoid contact as much as possible. But even still, at the base level of Tua, even though I'm not the biggest fan of him necessarily, he still led the NFL in passing yards last year and had a career season. So you can have doubts about him, and I think that that is absolutely fair. I am with you on that to some degree, but the Dolphins are still, without a doubt, a better offense with him in there, and they are a highly functioning offense as well when he is available for them. So, sort of to put a bow on things here, it sounds like the idea is at least 4 weeks. That would take them through their bye week, which would make things a little bit easier for them in terms of not even having to play a game there. I think it's probably going to take more than 4 weeks in particular, just with the sort of spotlight on the Dolphins right now in terms of this injury and understanding that this is one of the most serious situations, at least in recent history, of repeated head trauma that we have seen with Tua's situation. Not to mention, 2 of those concussions were suffered on primetime football. Everybody, that's kind of the main storyline with the Dolphins at this point, that I think they're going to be ultra cautious. We'll see how long they can sort of get through this stretch without Tua. Again, CBS Sports, when they did their article on it, said protocol would be at least 8 weeks. So that would take you closer to, I guess it would be, week 9-ish, week 10-ish. And that's a long time to sort of have Tua sitting out. And trying to work his way back into the groove of the offense. Again, maybe it's a little bit simplistic, so that would work in his favor. But either way, I think it's a pretty tall task that the Dolphins have right now in order to return to the playoffs. I'm pretty skeptical about it, but only time will tell. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But that being said, we are going to be moving on now, and we're going to be doing a tier list that we do every week. We have some adjustments from post-week 1 to post-week 2. So I'm going to be breaking down all 32 teams and where they stand in the NFL headed into week 3. So we are going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that sound. Getting my way into be put down. It ain't no place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, where we are now going to be breaking down my NFL tier list for heading into week 3. Now, for our video viewers here, what you see on the screen right now is where we were at headed into week 2, just sort of highlighting it in terms of sort of where my opinions were at there, holding me a little bit accountable as well so that I'm not talking out of both sides of my face here. But ultimately now diving into what we have headed into week 3, I think that the top is a lot more condensed in comparison to what we saw last week, and that is for a couple reasons. The San Francisco 49ers obviously lost this past weekend to the Vikings, a game that not a lot of people were sort of proposing that result. They have some key injuries. Christian McCaffrey going to be out for longer than initially anticipated, and Deebo Samuel dealing with a calf injury that is expected to keep them out for a couple weeks. And while the Chiefs did win this past weekend, and they are absolutely still the team to beat, they could probably be on a tier by themselves. In terms of where they are currently at, Isaiah Pacheco fractured his fibula, meaning that he is going to be out for at least 6 weeks, and there is a chance of being out even longer. And the reality for the Chiefs, yes, you have Patrick Mahomes, and he is still good enough to probably carry the Chiefs to a 12-13 win season by himself. It does sort of open up a gaping hole in terms of what their identity has been up to this point, considering the fact that Mahomes really hasn't been excellent to begin the 2024 season. Now, I still think he's the best quarterback in the league by a significant margin. I'm not worried there. That's why they sort of mesh with what was my Super Bowl contenders tier and sort of bring it all into one, which is now nobody is perfect. So I have the Chiefs and the 49ers, of course, and then I have the Ravens, Lions, Packers, Texans, Eagles, and Bills. The Bills are a team that moved up from last week to this week. They were maybe a little bit more on the side of dark horses as of last week, but I think that we have seen some real signs of life from that Bills defense, despite all of the turnover from last season to this, really on both sides of the ball. But I just believe that Josh Allen is good enough that the floor of that offense is still pretty high, all things considered, with him at quarterback. And then I think that the defense showed just a lot of promise for the fact that, yes, Tua ends up getting hurt in that Thursday night football game, but they were sort of dominating anyways up to that point as it was. They were able to shut down Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense in the second half of their week 1 matchup. So I think that all of those teams, really, it is the true Super Bowl contenders at this point. But again, everybody has their fatal flaws at this moment. Below that, I have the dark horse contenders, which consists of the Saints, Cardinals, Bengals, and Buccaneers. Now, out of this group, I probably feel best about the only team there that is 0-2, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. What I've seen from the Saints and the Buccaneers, both being 2-0 at this point, a couple big wins for them. The Saints demolishing the the Cowboys this past weekend, and then the Buccaneers facing off against the Lions. Being able to have those teams win ththose games in advance to 2-0, that is a great sign. But that being said, I think we're going to need to see a little bit more. The Saints beat up on a bad Washington Commanders team in week 1. I keep confusing the two schedules. The Saints beat up on a horrendous Panthers team in week 1, and it was the Buccaneers who also sort of beat up on that Commanders team. So I think that we need a little bit larger sample size. The Cardinals 1-1 in this tier. They ultimately just demolished the LA Rams this past weekend as the Rams are dealing with a million different injuries. The Cardinals are a team that I was a believer in coming into this season, and what we saw from Kyler Murray this past weekend, I thought was very impressive. He sort of returned to form, that player that was, sneaky in MVP conversations a few years ago, but just has not stayed healthy since then. So I have the Cardinals as a dark horse as well. Not passing the eye test, I have the Chicago Bears, Dallas Cowboys, New York Jets, Pittsburgh Steelers, Seattle Seahawks, and Atlanta Falcons. Every one of these teams has at least picked up one win along the way, but it hasn't exactly been pretty up to this point. Now, the Cowboys are the team that I think I did have them as a dark horse candidate last week. Coming into this week, it was sort of hard not to include them in that category based off of the big win that they had against the Browns, where they really just controlled the entire game and felt like they didn't really even have to try all that much in the second half. That, out of respect, I did put them in that dark horse tier, but they're a team that I didn't have making the playoffs coming into this season. I do worry about sort of that offensive line, and what we saw from the defense was really, really bad. Now, the Saints offense might actually just be elite. They've scored over 40 points in each of the past 2 games, but it's a little bit early to tell there. And the Cowboys, again, just not necessarily a team I was feeling excellent about coming into the year. And what I saw from them last week did display some concerns. Dak didn't look great, and they just really aren't that many weapons whatsoever on that Cowboys offense. So I have some real concerns there. The Steelers and the Seahawks, both 2-0 teams in this category. It's tough to say here because you look at the Steelers, they beat the Falcons in what was a pretty gritty win that I will give them credit for. I have the Falcons in this tier with them, so, that's not a bad win by any means, but doing so without scoring any touchdowns, you just don't feel like that offense is at the point you would hope that they are at this point. And then they ended up beating up as well, or on this past week, they were able to pull out a win against a very bad Broncos team that also dropped into the fatally flawed category this week, but we'll get into them later. The Seattle Seahawks also beat the Denver Broncos, then had to go to overtime against a Patriots team that was anticipated to be at the bottom of the league as well. So all of these teams, again, in the win category, could have some amount of an upside. There are definitely a handful of NFL fans that have believers in these teams, but ultimately they have started out sort of hit or miss up to this point in the season. Then tier 4, talented with serious concerns, I have the Dolphins, Rams, Jaguars, Browns, and Colts. These are all teams that, again, were sort of in that idea of they have playoff upside. I even had the Jaguars maybe a little bit higher in terms of could potentially put together a run, but the Jaguars have been a mess up to this point as they fall to 0-2. They're on 3 straight halves of football now where they have not looked good whatsoever. Yeah, you can play the game of if Travis Etienne doesn't fumble out of the end zone in the second half of that Jaguars game, maybe that turns out differently, but listen, we play the results here. It is what it is. And they have a very difficult schedule ahead of them on the road against Buffalo and Houston in upcoming weeks. They have to steal at least one of those games. So I'm concerned with the roster, and I'm also concerned about the schedule ahead for them. Browns are still in this category, in my opinion. Just the fact that, yes, they ended up beating the Jaguars, but I do feel like to some degree it's more about the Jaguars than the Browns themselves. Deshaun Watson did look better in this game, so if you have faith in them, my whole idea coming into this season is I thought the Browns were going to be a team that won double-digit games, that they just need average quarterback play from Deshaun Watson, and that defense is good enough to be able to help carry them to a postseason berth. That's sort of what we got in this game against the Jaguars. Deshaun Watson, again, was fine. Wasn't excellent. Definitely wasn't, the level of play that his contract would hope for him to play. But they just need stability at that quarterback position. That's sort of what they got from Watson this past week. So I think that they are there as well. Colts could be even a little bit more so in that potential to be scrappy tier, one tier down, but a lot of people were believing in the Colts anyways. Anthony Richardson is still just largely an unknown, I would say, in the NFL. Not a ton of playing experience, even going back to college as well. They have an excellent run game between him and Jonathan Taylor, a very good offensive line. I like their receivers a lot as well, but 0-2, losing to Malik Willis, those are definitely serious concerns in my eyes, which brings me to tier 5, potential to be scrappy. I have the Patriots, Vikings, Chargers, and Raiders. 2 teams sort of moved up from that bottom tier into this week's tier 5, and that is the Patriots and the Raiders. The Raiders, nothing scrappier than sort of the way that the Raiders were able to win this game this past weekend against the Ravens, where in the second half they played very good defense. They were sort of able to just scratch and claw this one out. No running game whatsoever, but it took Gardner Minshew of all people, where you're not going to necessarily trust on a week-to-week basis, but it does feel like with Gardner a little bit, anytime you count him out, he does just sort of throw his name back in the discussion of quarterback that can win you games. Antonio Pierce was a really bad week 1 for him. The punt decision late in the fourth quarter, that was what a lot of people were pointing to, saying he isn't ready for the moment. Well, he had his team ready in this game. This is a team that you can tell internally they believe in themselves, and that just might be enough for them to win games. But I did also have the Patriots moving up from last week to this week, despite losing a game, but that's playing a Seattle Seahawks team that was a 3.5-point favorite. This game was at home for the Patriots, and in both of these games, I think that they showed the recipe. Now, defense, not quite as good as you would necessarily hope, but I think that the ultimate strategy for the Patriots is dominate the run game. That's what they've been doing up to this point with Ramondre Stevenson. Antonio Gibson, who was an under-the-radar pickup for them, he had an additional 95 yards on the ground. So the two of them looked excellent. The defense was good enough. The passing game, I mean, the second half, we saw it really fall off, but that was also when the running game really started to pick up. So I think that they can hang around in games. Definitely don't anticipate them being excellent, but, they can win a handful of games this season. And then the Chargers, by the way, who are 2-0, but they haven't necessarily beaten anyone either. The Raiders and the Broncos are their 2 wins. So they could even, maybe work their way up to a higher tier. I wouldn't quite put them on tier 2 with those other teams that I currently have. But, if you want to talk about dark horse, that's sort of the entire hope for this Chargers team moving forward here. And then also Vikings as well. I talked about, I really like the infrastructure. I really like Kevin O'Connell. And Sam Darnold has been playing pretty good football for them up to this point. So all scrappy teams there. And then fatally flawed, I have the Titans, Giants, Panthers, Commanders, and Broncos. Broncos moving down from last week to this week. Sean Payton, I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt up to this point, but that offense just looks disastrous. Sean Payton really hasn't been helping anything out, but there's also just such a lack of weapons on that Broncos offense that I have a really hard time sort of believing in them. Defense has been sort of punching above their weight class, so I will give them credit for that, but they are fatally flawed in the fact that their offense is just not good. And then the Commanders definitely could be in that scrappy category. They win against the Giants this past week, but they do so without scoring a touchdown. I think that defense is really bad, and I still do have questions about the offense as well. Haven't really seen all that much passing yet. Jaden Daniels has done a fine job in terms of the running game and just taking what's available to him, but haven't really seen, I don't think there's any way that the Commanders are going to be able to win in shootouts, and that to me feels like what it would have to take for them to stay competitive. So let me know what your thoughts are on my tier list here. These are obviously just opinions. I'm not going to, slam my fist on the table and say that if you disagree, you're wrong. This is an open conversation, so let me know what your thoughts are on this list as a whole, but we are going to be switching gears here, moving on to some of the young quarterbacks. I just talked about Jaden Daniels. It's been a very interesting first couple weeks in terms of some of those young quarterbacks. So we are going to be starting off here by talking about the play of Caleb Williams, as he has sort of struggled out of the gates for Chicago through his first 2 weeks, and we'll be discussing what level of concern there should be for Caleb at this point. But before we get into that, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I want to dive into what we have seen from Caleb Williams, up to this point in his first 2 weeks, where the number 1 overall pick from 2024 had a lot of expectations. I myself was drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit. I figured with how talented that offense is, that there was a chance for him to, match what CJ Stroud, which was able to do in his rookie season, which was a historical outlier. So that was definitely on me for getting too caught up in the moment there. But ultimately, it has, Caleb Williams has looked like a rookie. And, among the entire class, we have seen a lot of slow starts. But Caleb, up to this point, he's now 1-1 at least. So there is that going for him. But week one, obviously, far more about the defense than his overall play. I would say in Sunday night's game against the Texans, the first half looked really good for him, in my opinion, all things considered, based off of the fact that, he was able to come out playing on script on that first drive, looked very comfortable. He was 5 for 5 in that. And then, by the end of the first half, still the Bears were absolutely in that game. Caleb himself was, I have the stats here that I'm pulling up, 12 of 15 for 91 yards. Wasn't extraordinary, but again, was playing within the offense, just playing comfortably, it looked like, getting the ball out quickly and just taking the plays that were there for him. And then it seemed to me that there was a little bit of desperation that was going on as the game was progressing, because the Bears really weren't getting all that much going for them. The running game was very disappointing, and that's where I especially think, this idea that I was so sold on everything that was going on around Caleb that he was going to be able to settle in. The unfortunate fact is that that running game has really not looked comfortable up to this point. DeAndre Swift in this game, 14 carries for 18 yards. Haven't really gotten into that running back depth that I am a fan of, but that is probably for, good reason that Khalil Herbert, who I like, Travis Homer, Roschon Johnson, that they're just not really getting any of their touches, and they're not having success. That offensive line is really struggling. I think that both of their tackles in Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones looked especially rough on Sunday. Now, that is a tough Texans defensive front, and defense as a whole. The Texans, I'm definitely in on this upcoming season, but generally speaking here, their offensive line was really struggling. They were consistently getting themselves into 3rd and longs, and during those situations as well, that only incentivized DeMeco Ryans, who usually isn't a blitz-heavy defensive play caller. He was deciding to bring the pressure, and ultimately, just sort of definitely rushed Caleb Williams' process. And that's the thing, is it's sort of, for Caleb Williams, it's balancing this idea of, you want to play within the offense. There is also still star talent that is, there with Caleb. So it's trying to get him to avoid diving into his bad impulses and just taking what's available to him. And both of his interceptions were sort of along those lines. The one that he had interceptions on 2 consecutive drives. The first one actually was more so just about him underthrowing DJ Moore, but the next play was really bad, or the next drive, I should say, resulted in him throwing a really bad interception where you could see him sort of starting to panic a little bit, trying to make something out of nothing. And it was him sort of getting out of the pocket, somehow getting out of the grips of Danielle Hunter, who was incredible in this game, rolling out, and he just was sort of on the move, off-platform throw, trying to make something special happen, and again, just did not have that same sort of arm strength that he was hoping for. I think it was because of the fact that he just didn't have his feet set whatsoever, and that was a costly decision. He also had an interception that was wiped off of the board in the first half. That was a ridiculous decision where he's sort of stepping up to the right and then throwing across his body to the left sideline in a ball that had no shot of ever being caught. Now, he got bailed out there because there was a holding call on a Houston linebacker, but some of those decisions are just the ones that the Bears are really trying to phase out of his game. And I think that, again, it's finding that balance of letting Caleb be Caleb and show off his stardom, but as of right now, it's very uncommon for rookie quarterbacks to light the league on fire the way that CJ Stroud did last year. There's no pressure for him to live up to that CJ Stroud bar that was set last year, and I'm somebody who said that Caleb could possibly top that even with all of the established weapons that he had. I am admitting that I was over my skis a little bit on that mark, but it's still a situation here where the Bears have an elite defense at this point, and I was really high on that core coming into the season, but especially so with what I saw this past weekend against what is a good Texans offense. I'm all in on that is an elite group. Now, what are you going to do from there and be able to sort of make those adjustments and not get carried away with trying to do too much? Now, like I mentioned, I was so high on the surrounding pieces there. There's a lot more question marks than I was really ready for. And again, it was foolish of me. I thought their offensive line was going to be improved. That's an area that they have been investing into and trying to get better. But, anytime that the Texans sent blitzes, any of those stunts where they ended up having guys loop from the outside in, it just totally messed with the heads of the interior linemen there as well. And Caleb was getting physically punished. And that is another area for Caleb where I would really like to see him try and avoid some of those hits, those lazy sort of running down the sideline. A couple times in the second half, he got himself absolutely lit up by Texans linebacker Azeez Al-Shire, that there's just no need to sort of take those types of hits. And that's when one of the fights broke out in this game. So Caleb needs to be smarter for his own safety. I think you could say that about a lot of the young quarterbacks in the NFL right now. I'd throw Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson into that same category as well, where it's like you are just far too important to this franchise right now to be allowing yourself to get rocked like that. And again, especially against a hard-hitting linebacking core like the Texans, just, take that out of your game, at least for now. But as much as I can talk about, the players themselves, and Keenan Allen was out in this game, so that obviously didn't do him any favors either necessarily. But the play calling for Chicago has been a little bit suspect in my opinion. Shane Waldron, his first season as the offensive coordinator for the Bears, Waldron hasn't exactly had a super lucrative, history of being successful as an offensive coordinator. Was previously with Seattle, and it's not like he was necessarily great there. Last season, Geno Smith had a little bit of a down season in comparison to 2022 when he had sort of that comeback. When he had that comeback player of the year campaign and was really good and led the Seahawks to the playoffs. That I was just really unenthused by the play calling decisions from Shane Waldron and this Bears offense. Overall, they had that touchdown drive in the second quarter where there were a couple plays on the drive where every receiver is basically 5 yards within the line of scrimmage and just had no potential for big plays. And that's something where I feel like you need to add some more spacing for Caleb Williams, because you see as well, Caleb had that huge scramble on the fourth quarter drive when they were backed up within their own 10-yard line. The Texans brought the blitz, played man coverage, and Caleb was able to take it for himself on a scramble for 20 or so yards. That, you need open space for Caleb Williams to really fully thrive into what he is. And he has looked really off on some of these deep shots, and that's, I would say, marginally concerning. I think it's something that he's going to be able to work his way back into, but ultimately, you need to at least give options for some of these plays. Otherwise, I think that is when you start to see Caleb get a little bit impatient and not be willing to sort of play within the offense. And it doesn't help him either when the offensive line is getting ran through as well. But, I think that they just need to do a better job of actually giving Caleb opportunities to make big plays. When you have the first play of the second half, if you go back and you watch it, you have two tight ends lined up in the backfield with your running back, and it's DJ Moore and somebody else at wide receiver split out to the edge. The receivers just go deep with, good coverage there, and then you have all three of DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet, and Gerald Everett basically all just in a parallel line right at the line of scrimmage. What's the point of that? Now, sure, maybe you want to work Caleb into more of a rhythm. I think it was Collinsworth on the call that mentioned, you want to get Cole Kmet involved as well, because he had a very quiet week one, didn't see the field as much. You're trying to build up confidence, and I do understand that, but you can only dink and dunk for so long. And then when you talk about as well the number of bubble screens that they are throwing in here, they just feel like wasted plays and a waste of the talent that is on that offense. I would prefer them to, and again, maybe this changes once Keenan Allen is available. Maybe they understood that the defense they were playing was going to apply pressure. Again, it was a little bit uncharacteristic how aggressive they were, so I don't feel like it was some sort of a big scouting point from them, but they need to find ways to generate more positive plays on first and second downs to avoid getting him in those third and long situations where opposing teams can bring the pressure and sort of throw him off of his game. And then, that's a couple different ways. They need to be able to run the ball better, but also just having threats of actually, taking chunk plays on those first and second downs. I just didn't feel like they were ever really available for Caleb. And when we saw the third and shorts, I thought for the most part, Caleb did a pretty good job airing it out there. Now, they were pretty easy throws, all things considered. So I understand that the way that I'm describing this is maybe babying Caleb Williams a little bit. I mean, that's probably not a very endearing way to look at it, but he's a rookie quarterback. There's an adjustment period for any of these guys, and it's not like Caleb did get some runway in the preseason, got, especially that game, I believe it was against the Bills, where he was able to play the most of the first half, if not the whole thing. That, there's just an adjustment period that is going to take place, and they just need to be able to find ways to sort of take the pressure off of him a little bit more. I still do have confidence that he's going to be special, but overall, that offense just feels so clunky, and Caleb needs to be better. Some of the pocket presence stuff with him, he's a special athlete and he's able to break away from defenders given the opportunities sometimes, but there have also been a few times where he has not felt the pressure coming from the backside whatsoever, and it's resulted in him getting sacked. He was sacked 7 times in this game. The offensive line was bad, but we can also sort of come to the conclusion as well that Caleb needs to do a better job of sort of understanding that internal clock, and not just that, but just be a little bit more aware of his surroundings. So to put a bow on this, I don't think it's super concerning in terms of Caleb Williams, the player himself. I think that he will get there, even if there are some inaccuracy issues, and that pocket presence, like I was just mentioning, needs to improve. I think my bigger concern is just with, in general here, what that Bears offense looks like. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're breaking down Caleb Williams himself, but he is, of course, not the only young quarterback that is going through some growing pains. We just found out that Bryce Young is going to be benched moving forward here. So I want to sort of look at all of the quarterbacks that were drafted over the course of the past 2 seasons and rank them based off of their long-term upside. So we got 8 QBs that were drafted in the first 2 rounds of the past couple years. We're going to be diving into their play, what we've seen from them so far, and who I personally would be comfortable building around long term. So we are going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to now be putting together a list of ranking the top young quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, we're specifically going to be looking at the QBs of the past two draft classes. In the first and second round, we have 8 players that have been selected with high capital draft picks. So I'm going to be doing these rankings based off of not exactly what I've seen these first couple weeks. Obviously, it plays a factor, but still a small sample size. So just generally speaking, who I would most prefer to build around moving forward. Number 8, unfortunately, has to be Bryce Young, who was just benched by the Carolina Panthers. I understand all of the, sympathy, and I am also sympathetic to Bryce Young for what has been a disastrous start to his NFL career. You can make the argument that, yes, the Panthers have tried to invest into the supporting core. They went out and acquired Deontay Johnson. They've been drafting offensive linemen. And they've been making marginal moves here and there, but ultimately, they haven't totally panned out for him. And Bryce Young himself has just not been good enough, where it's not even like he was under extremely heavy pressure against LA this past week, but you look at specifically that one play that's sort of being thrown around the most, of when Bryce is rolling out to his left, looking downfield, and I'm not even sure if there was anything downfield, but get rid of the ball. Instead, he just lets himself get smoked for a sack, and you're looking at a quarterback that has just such little confidence right now and has shown very little ability, to the point that the Panthers decided to bench him. Again, we can both agree that the developmental track of Bryce Young, based off of what Carolina has been trying to do, has not been sufficient enough for him. But at the same time, you can only make excuses for so long, and ultimately he's going to the bench right now, and his future is TBD. I almost tried to slide him into number 7 as well, to say that, listen, if he gets a fresh start somewhere and he is able to build his career back up, I'm rooting for that, and I hope it happens. But until Bryce sort of gives us NFL fans and experts a chance to really believe in him and something to build off of, unfortunately, he is at the bottom of this list. Number 7, Will Levis. Again, based off of the long-term upside, again, for talking ceilings, I think that Bryce Young could maybe rival Will Levis here for that number 7 spot, or even higher even. This is obviously Bryce Young, who was drafted number 1 overall last year, but Will Levis is at least still playing in football games, and he has made 2 of the most boneheaded quarterback decisions that we've seen in recent years. The pick 6 against Chicago in week 1 that basically lost them the game, and then this past week, whatever that lateral was back in the pocket in the red zone of trying to throw it backwards to a running back. I mean, horrible decision making there. But he at least has something that you feel like you can build an offense around. He is pretty mobile. He's a good athlete, and his arm strength is solid. Like, there are positive traits that you can build off of. Now, again, he needs to get out of his own head. I thought he was a much better decision maker last season. I'm not sure what it is about him that has sort of pushed him into this idea that he, has to do more, and that he's just gotten so frantic. Again, I'm not really sure what to do with Will Levis at this point. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Mason Rudolph does end up taking the starting job from him. But he's somebody that last year we saw it's possible to have a good enough offense surrounding him. He led the comeback the comeback against the Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football last year, down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. So we've seen success with Levis in the NFL at this point, even if it is on a smaller scale. So unfortunately for Bryce Young, I just couldn't put him below somebody that has just been so unsuccessful up to this point and his own organization no longer believes. Number 6, I have J.J. McCarthy. Very tough. Him and Drake May both are on this list, even though they're not playing this year. And you're kind of just throwing darts at a board here where you don't know what he looks like really in NFL action. And this is for JJ and this is for Drake May as well, where we just saw Bo Nix ultimately JJ, now that I say the name Bo Nix out loud, I should have JJ one spot higher, but is what it is. We don't know what he looks like against an NFL defense up to this point, where, Bo Nix was pretty good in preseason, all things considered, and then took the leap to the NFL, and it's been very messy since then. JJ, coming into the NFL, I mean, this is sort of that adjustment of the idea of, sure, he looked good at Michigan, but on the other end of that, he wasn't tasked of being somebody that was, throwing the ball at a very high volume. He was very good when he did get those opportunities, but we just still don't know at this point. I probably should have put him up a little bit higher because unless I just forgot Bo Nix altogether on this list. I guess Bo would be right behind J.J. McCarthy. Human error. You'll have to forgive me there. But number 5, I have Anthony Richardson. And this is one where I thought it was a real toss-up between him and number 4. Richardson, we know the ceiling is extremely high with him because of that arm talent, because of the athleticism of him running the ball, the size that he has. But I just feel like he has been incredibly inconsistent in terms of accuracy up to this point. The decision making is fine. I mean, I wouldn't say the interception that he threw this past weekend in the first quarter against the Packers was a really bad one going into double coverage, but I think that it sort of depends on what you are looking for in terms of building up a quarterback. Very high ceiling with Anthony Richardson, but on the other end of it, are we ever really going to see him fully put it together? I would have a little bit less confidence in terms of, I think that Anthony Richardson has a good chance of busting. I think that, I think that he has a good chance of being a bust, but I'm also just not really sure if that's who I would fully... I mean, the Colts should feel like they're in a fine position right now. They have a two-headed weapon in the backfield in terms of the running game between him and Jonathan Taylor, that there's an offense that can be built around it, but I would prefer more consistency from the arm itself, which is why I do have Jaden Daniels right ahead of him, where Jaden... I would really prefer to see some, more downhill shots for Jaden Daniels up to this point. You look at this past week, stat line looked pretty good. 12 of his 23 completions were behind the line of scrimmage. That doesn't really give me all that much to work with when half of your completions are basically net 0 yards and then whatever you get after the run there. But that being said, he did have some moments where he pushed the ball down the field a little bit more. 6 for 9 on throws of 10 plus yards past the line of scrimmage. A lot of them were open. But the thing is with Jaden Daniels, for me at least, is that he is a pretty precise quarterback, all things considered. And I do feel like ultimately he has this super high floor in terms of his running ability that you hope that he can refine his game through the air a little bit. But either way, it's an offense that you can get consistency from. And even going back to his time at LSU, being a good decision maker was one of his best qualities, that he was, did steer away from making the bad decisions. Just 7 interceptions in 26 games as a starter at LSU. So I think that he has shown that he should have thrown an interception this past week, throwing a little bit of a lob jump ball-ish to Zach Ertz, and Jason Pinnock of the Giants was just unable to bring it down because the fact that Zach Ertz sort of ripped it away from him. But Jaden Daniels, I think he's a good decision maker, all things considered. I don't know how aggressive he is going to be through the air, at least early on in his career, but the vision with him is Lamar Jackson. I think that he is going to provide you a good rushing attack always. It's just a matter of, will that arm ever come to develop? He is a little bit on the older side. I try not to weigh that too heavily in terms of NFL quarterbacks, because the idea is when you're drafting them in the first round that they will be your franchise quarterback for 10 plus years. So the age shouldn't matter quite as much there, but there are maybe some slight hesitations of, well, why hasn't he developed that part of his game yet? I don't want to rule out the idea, just because he's older, he won't ever have it. I think that he can find a way there. And again, it was a little bit of a coin flip for me between Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels. If you're looking for that superstar potential, I think that that's more in the boat of Anthony Richardson. But if I were starting an NFL franchise, I would prefer to lean towards somebody I can trust a little bit more on a game-to-game basis. Jaden Daniels has been consistent, efficient, and hasn't put the ball in harm's way for the most part. So I do have him slightly above Anthony Richardson. This one, I know probably not a lot of people are going to love this. I have Drake May at number 3, and we haven't seen him take an NFL snap yet. So that there's definitely a lot of risk. Like I mentioned with JJ, it's throwing darts at a board a little bit when you're talking about prospects who haven't even played in the NFL yet. But Drake May is somebody I've been really high on since his time at UNC, that I think he has all of the physical tools. He has the combination of, Jaden Daniels by his senior season at LSU was more of an air raid attack guy, but I don't think he was ever really the level of passer that Drake May was. Jaden Daniels benefited from having 2 wide receivers that were drafted in the first round this past year. Drake May was not working with that same level of talent around him, and there's, a case to be made that he might actually be better off the fact that he did have to spread the ball out a little bit more. I think that he has all of the running ability, maybe not quite as fast as Jaden Daniels, but he's bigger, he's more bulky. I think that he can be more durable than Jaden Daniels, and, injuries, again, sort of a crapshoot there in terms of evaluating how healthy a guy can stay, but I think that Drake May has sort of everything that you could possibly need out of a quarterback, and I think that he's really going to benefit as well from the idea that he gets to sit behind a little bit longer. He is on the younger side. I am very high on the upside of Drake May in the long term. Number 2, I have Caleb Williams. Jaden Daniels has been better than Caleb Williams up to this point in the season. I will wholeheartedly agree there, but I also just don't think that 2 games is a big enough sample size to sort of overreact to. And Caleb ultimately has all of that superstar potential. And I think that, we've seen flashes of it-ish in terms of the fact that he was greatly under pressure this past weekend and was still able to make the plays with his legs. I think the arm talent will come. We saw it in college. We'll have to see. But I think that, it's been a very slow start for all of these guys from 8-2, that none of them have necessarily fully proven to reach that high potential yet. I'm still banking on Caleb Williams to figure it out ultimately. We'll have to see there. But number 1, this is by a landslide, and that would be CJ Stroud, of course, the number 2 overall pick in 2023, that he has been nothing short of excellent since he began his NFL career. Some people are dinging him a little bit for his week 2 performance against the Bears, but I think the Bears defense is excellent. And there were some of those throws, especially the one that he had in the first half on the run to the sideline to Nico Collins, that, what else could he really prove at this point? Sure, the idea of he has a long way to go in terms of growing and trying to become one of the elites of the NFL, but he also has shown that he's more than capable of being a franchise quarterback. He now is the franchise quarterback for the Texans, and they made out excellently, of course, in that ordeal of the 2023 draft, unlike the Panthers. But let me know what your thoughts are on my ranking. Again, I know it's a lot of speculation at this point, so I would be, greatly mistaken if I said that my list is perfect. Let me know not just what you would change, but why you would change them, as we are now going to be diving into our final segment of the day, and that is we're going to be talking about larger scale here, who have been the most impressive NFL quarterbacks through 2 weeks, because we have some big-time surprise candidates on this list that have been a lot of fun to watch up to this point. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I want to just talk about the most impressive quarterbacks through the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. Right now, we have a lot of interesting names that are on this list that I just want to sort of capitalize on and give them some praise, because it's going to be interesting to monitor whether or not they are able to continue the level of production that we've seen from them early on in this season. And I want to talk about some honorable mentions, but before I even do that, I do just want to say I do not have Patrick Mahomes on this list, and I would still take Patrick Mahomes over anybody else in the NFL. But if you look at his numbers overall, we're seeing uncharacteristic interceptions, and interceptions can be a deceiving stat at times. Sometimes they're out of desperation, or if you're Anthony Richardson, this is a random example here, but throwing a Hail Mary at the end of the game, having that get picked off. But just bad decisions from Patrick Mahomes and bad balls, just throwing it over the middle, not seeing linebackers. Specifically, I'm referencing that first interception in the Cincinnati game. So he's still excellent. No questions there. He's just not on this list. But without further ado, diving into this, I want to start with a couple of honorable mentions here, which would be Joe Burrow and Sam Darnold. Neither of them in the top 5 in my eyes, but I still think that I've overall been largely impressed with what they have shown. Joe Burrow, somebody that I still think is one of those elites in the NFL. A lot of people are sort of turning against them at this point, but I think that he has really done everything that he can up to this point, given the fact that the run game hasn't been great for them, that there's been a lot of weird energy going on around their receivers. T. Higgins obviously still not playing. Jamar Chase feeling like he was misled by the organization, that the vibes within that organization have been off. But he has still been delivering, kept them competitive in that Chiefs game. Even in week 1 against the Patriots, I don't think he was bad, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. As for Sam Darnold, Vikings now probably the most surprising 2-0 team at this point, and Sam Darnold has been able to step into a new system with Kevin O'Connell and has been really good for them up to this point. I do think that, the only reason to some degree, and Sam Darnold, I'm not going to get on his case. I think that he has vastly exceeded expectations. That being said, I don't think he's in that top 5 level just now, because the second half of the 49ers game, Sam Darnold taking sacks, worst decisions, probably the only reason the Niners were in that game, but all things considered, he has been very impressive. Number 5, Baker Mayfield. Baker is somebody that just got his contract this offseason, and it's interesting because you look across the league at Dak, who has struggled. You look at Trevor Lawrence, who has struggled. Jared Goff, Tua, obviously different situation, but I still don't think that he looked great. Baker Mayfield is the one guy that has, really lived up to the contract up to this point. That he, beat up on a Washington defense that is bad, I will say. So I give him credit there, but it's not like I'm going to... I was shocked by that necessarily. The way that he hung in there against the Lions and with Aiden Hutchinson just causing absolute mayhem for him, ultimately was very much able to handle the pressure. And how about the elusiveness that we saw from him as well? Again, evading pressure in the backfield, scrambling for himself. He had the rushing touchdown on what looked like a quarterback draw. I think that he has been excellent up to this point. Did have an interception in this game against the Lions. There were a couple miscommunications, it looked like, from the receivers. Just no reason for it. Was Chris Godwin and Mike Evans basically running right alongside one another. Just not a great decision there from Baker, but you take that play out of it, I think that he has been very good for them. Number 4, I have Kyler Murray. Gets dinged a little bit for the second half of week 1 against the Bills, where just was not the same level of success there last drive. I mean, he was dealing with pressure on that Marvin Harrison Jr. missed play that I don't want to bury him for that by any means, but really, so a little bit lower maybe than other people may have, but I mean, everything that he showed in week 2 against the Rams was nothing short of phenomenal, where the plays, both, just standing in and delivering the throws, but we got to see that electric energy of him scrambling around. And sort of what's so special about him is you see a lot of quarterbacks come into the league nowadays. You can look at it especially with some of the rookies of, they're athletic and they're going to run around and use their legs and scramble. The difference between them and Kyler Murray is that when Kyler does this, just his ability to keep his eyes downfield and, at least be surveying the field for throwing options other than just resulting in running the ball himself. I think that is such a huge part of his development as a quarterback over the course of these past few years. Everybody was sort of off the scent of him headed into this season, but I've been a huge believer in the Cardinals leading into this year, because I think if we get a fully healthy Kyler Murray for a full season, he is going to really return to form. He now has what I believe is his best wide receiver of his NFL career so far in Marvin Harrison Jr. I know DeAndre Hopkins, you can, debate with me there. I'm not saying it's a clear-cut decision, but I think that MHJ is going to be his most reliable receiver that he's had, and I'm expecting special things from Kyler this season. Number 3, I have CJ Stroud. Went back and forth as to whether he should be number 3 or number 2. I would say this, it's not like the Bears game was unbelievable from him. He was facing a very tough defense behind him, but just continuing to be such a smart quarterback in terms of not making mistakes, not putting the ball in harm's way, really. Saw him get a little bit aggressive in week 1 against the Colts for that red zone interception that I didn't love, but all things considered, his ability to make any type of a throw, in the pocket, the deep shots. We saw that incredible throw that he had rolling out to his right to Nico Collins in the first half of this Sunday night football game. That CJ Stroud just continues to impress, and he, like we just talked about as well in the last segment, he is, the best young quarterback really in the league that I think has an extremely bright future. And it's not a hot take. I feel like just about everybody would agree with that. I had him and Derek Carr competing for this number 2 spot. I gave it to Derek Carr because when he has played, he's been, absolutely excellent. Did have an interception in this Cowboys game this past week. I think that we can acknowledge a couple different things. Derek Carr, the play that he has had up to this point has been elite. Do I think that he's an elite quarterback? Not really at this point. He is something like 32 years old. It's really hard for me to imagine, and I've been a pro Derek Carr guy for some years now, that it's not like he's just turned this page and now that he's up with Clint Kubiak that all of a sudden he's this entirely new quarterback, but he is executing their system to a T at this point, and he's been a huge beneficiary as well. One, you could say, played the Panthers in that mix as well to sort of add to that. But additionally, he's been able to thrive off of the fact that Alvin Kamara is having an excellent season, that he's been living off of a lot of play action passes as well. And he's also had the benefit of playing with a lead. Now, obviously, they've scored on the first 15 drives that Carr has played in. So, no complaints there. But he also, ultimately speaking here, is eventually going to have to be in a closer game where he has to close out in the fourth quarter. That's where he needs to answer questions a little bit more, because we've seen Derek Carr a handful of years ago with the Raiders sort of be this type of player. Is it a matter of him being able to, sort of refine that energy and be able to sustain it for the upcoming season and longer? Or is this just a little bit of a flash in the pan? Either way, I'm very excited to see Carr playing at this level. But the number 1 quarterback in the NFL so far, I think, is pretty easily Josh Allen. And I don't really know what the debate is. Yeah, Derek Carr has been winning games. But again, I think a lot of circumstances has helped that. Josh Allen really hasn't had anything easy up to this point, where his defense put him in a little bit of a hole week 1. I know it was partially on him as well. He had a fumble on, it was maybe even the first drive of that Cardinals game. And he just sort of went into superhuman mode from there, driving down the field with ease. You see it at the end of games. The end of that first half is really, I think, when he was awoken, and he hasn't slowed down since then, because Josh Allen has the elite ability of being able to, sort of manufacture plays off script, and he has all of the physical tools, the running ability. I mean, you saw him in the red zone of that Cardinals game, keeping it for himself, running the ball for a couple touchdowns, that, superhero dive to the end zone that he did end up hurting his hand on. But even then, coming into this next upcoming week, and when he played against the Dolphins, obviously things took a drastic turn once Tua went down, and at that point, it was really more so just about preserving. And that's why his passing stats are so much on the lower end, considering the fact that he really didn't have to throw all that much. I think he had 150 yards in that game against the Dolphins. That it might have even been less than that, as I'm double checking here on the fly. But the counting stats aren't all the way there. It was 139 yards, but he is just a special talent, and this is a year where, there have been a lot of doubters. We have some doubters here at the GSMC Sports Network, but I think that he just continues to impress now without Stephon Diggs. You have a run game, at least, that's taking a step forward, but Josh Allen is, the model of, F it, I'm going to do it myself, and he has been excellent. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.